activity. You know what I mean? Like, you don't give conscious intention for you to sweat. Like, if somebody poke you, like, which is something that they also mention as well. If a person pokes you with a needle, you know, automatically you're going to develop sweat. You know what I'm saying? And your palms and your feet. That's not something that you think about. That's why I don't like his methods too much. And based on what I read about him, his methods were also used for lie detector tests. I can understand that. But as far as, like, you know, because he patented something called hemp sink or sink hemp. I may have the term incorrect, and if I do, like I say, I you know, make sure I note it if I have to, and just, you know, put an edit like it's actually called this or that. But it was basically a frequency sound, you know what I mean, that he came up with, and he felt like based on the frequency of the sound, it could put a person in a relaxed state or an extremely alert state. So as far as, like, you know, his methods, I just didn't understand, like, if you're studying altered states of consciousness, especially more so out of body experiences, somebody could look at, like, you could take your data, you could say this is how much electric activity goes on in the skin during this state. You know what I mean? Like, that wouldn't, it's like if I want to use a metaphor or analogy, I would say that's almost like saying, like taking a person that go down the street and they get into a fight and they come back and they got like a bruise on their jaw. Maybe a few scratches, nothing too bad. And they tell the people who they come home to or whatnot, I just got into a fight, but I just fucked somebody up. These are my bruises or whatever. But if you look at this other person, they're much more messed up than what I look right now. People like us, if we hear something like that, we'll have to take that as like word of mouth or whatever. You know what I'm saying? It's the same thing with his results. It's like, regardless of how intense these electric passes, like these electric currents through the natural one, for example, not like, you know, when you know, amplify the electricity between these electrodes. I'm talking about like whatever state of mind, whatever that a person may be thinking or whatnot, whatever that stimulates, you know what I'm saying, an emotional state in a person. I feel like regardless of regardless of what the measurement it is, it would never prove for sure whether a person actually astral projected out of their body. That's why, like, I don't put too much weight. But as far as like him, he's one of the earliest people as far as the United States that started studying this. And his foundation, the Monroe Institute, like, I think they said he had like at his height about 20 persons or whatever, but they would never, like, they had about 20 persons. He had about 50 professionals that worked with him. They're still in operation today. You know what I'm saying? But I don't know. To me, the most notable thing about him, aside from his operations and how early he started doing this research in the United States, is the other guy that I mentioned, Lieutenant Jim Channing. You know, the guy that worked with the major, or the general, the former general, Albert Stubblebine. As far as Jim Channing, what I read about him, he later on becoming like a president of the Monroe Institute. They didn't say exactly when, and I didn't research it in addition. But just because this guy directly worked with, as far as Jim Channing, because he directly worked with Albert Stubblebine, who was also a sponsor of the government-initiated Stargate project, being that he later on became, as far as Jim Channing, a head of the Monroe Institute. That's why that's like the one of the main reasons why I'm even speaking on Robert Monroe or whatnot. But as far as him, now, like I said, he wrote his first book in 1971, and it was called Journeys Out of the Body. and it was pretty successful or whatnot. Then he ended up writing 2 more books later on. A second one called Far Journeys. That one he wrote that in 1985. And 1985 is also the year he ended up changing the name of his company to Monroe Institute, as it is named today. Then his final book, it was called Ultimate Journeys. He wrote that in 1994. And granted, again, I never read none of his books or whatnot, but as far as like him, he's one of the pioneers of this period. But I'm not going to even attempt to extract anything away from him as far as what I deem to be the closest to empirical evidence, regardless of how many years he studied in that field and the results that he yielded. Because from my point of view, it's just not impactful enough. And then there's other people who I can more so rely on. Now, going forward to General Albert Stubblebine. Now, as far as him, he was also a war veteran. As far as like his accolades are mostly in intelligence or whatnot. He moved through the ranks of the army pretty quick, and he became more so involved with intelligence, especially during Vietnam. Hold on, let me pause this. Hold on, y'all. I'm gonna go ahead and finish this outside so I could just get through it. So I don't like pausing my phone. So I'm gonna pause this. I'm gonna go outside and I'm just gonna finish it. That's why I just put this hoodie on. What up, y'all? I'm back outside, so I'm gonna go ahead and finish this. I got a cigarette this time. Fucking, I'm outside, you know what I'm saying? Finishing this vlog. I ain't gotta be too whatever, you know what I'm saying? It's real life. But I left off talking about, I believe General Albert Stubblebine. Now, again, as far as him, I would give more stock or place more value in his significance in these fields of parapsychology that I also believe in, more so because of his background. Now, even though, Robert Monroe, he had education too, and, he funded a lot of his studies as well. It's just that, like, somebody like General Albert Stubblebine, he was like basically a 2-star general. You know what I'm saying? He had, he had a Star of Merit and then the Bronze Star for his service in Vietnam. He was a part of the 25th Battalion, I believe, or whatnot. But, even though he worked mostly intelligence, his service was exceptional enough for him to be decorated with those 2 stars. So in considering that and in his accomplishments, I don't look at him as like a rinky-dink figure. You get what I'm saying? Like, even if I had the perspective like, okay, this is silly sci-fi shit, being logical at the same time, I would still think like, okay, but at the same time, I don't disagree with this guy. But based on his background, it's not like it's like he come from a background that like for example, and this is not to diss anything aesthetic, but like say you were artists of something more so aesthetic. You get what I'm saying? Even though it doesn't take credit away from a person of that background that pursues this type of stuff as well for a whole bunch of reasons I'm not gonna go into, because then that's an extra 7 minutes. But like if somebody, like if I was a skeptic, I would say, okay, well, it's not like he's an artist or somebody from a background to where I could kind of, extract the notion about the person and be like, okay, I could tell they like things sci-fi-ish. You get what I'm saying? His background, in my opinion, will force a person to, again, even if your conclusion turns out to be different as far as your approach, you have to take a neutral approach and at least weigh the so-called results that he yielded in his own studies, just strictly due to his background alone. You get what I'm saying? So again, as far as like somebody like him, I will put more trust in what he has to say than like a Robert Monroe. But as far as this guy, after Vietnam or whatnot, because of his services, he became the head of the Electronics Research and Development Command. That unit, that was around like 1980. And during this time, now this part right here gets a little vague or murky, because when I researched his name on Wikipedia, because even like 6 years ago, I don't know why I got a burp. 6 years ago, when I wrote Metaphysical Addendum, I didn't include this guy right here because I didn't know too much about him. But as far as me doing my research about him, I would say around this time, slightly before, is when he was inspired into these fields of thought concerning altered consciousness. Because when you go on Wikipedia and you type his name in, or you go on Google, you type his name in, you read about him, that's when they're going to bring up that guy, Jim Channon, who wrote a book in 1979 or whatnot. And the book was called First Earth Battalion, or First Earth Battalion Manual or Field Manual. And the book was basically talking about like the possibility of a super soldier, pretty much. And being that book came out in 1979, and he's mentioned when reading about Albert Stubblebine, I'm going to surmise that he met that guy earlier than that. So like around this time up until 1980, when he became the head of IRADCOM, I'm going to say that he was already, during the midst of that, researching these things, that his mind had already been sparked. Granted, they do give the credit to Jim Channon. The next year after that, that's when he became the head of another command called, the acronym is INSCOM. INSCOM. And it basically means Intelligence Service Command. Now, when he became the head of this Army entity, for lack of a better word, that's when he took it upon himself and grasped at the opportunity to research these altered states of consciousness that he was interested in. And that lasted from like 1981 up until 1981 to 1984, and that's when he ended up retiring, because during that little 3-year period, he had incurred some criticisms as far as like the people that they would experiment on. They felt some folks felt like that they were, because a lot of them were civilians as well. Some people felt like it was a high risk to bring them into like high security zones. You see what I'm saying? So that was some of the criticisms. There was another gala that took place, and during this gala, I can't remember. I'm gonna try to remember his name. The Army Chief of Staff, his name was John Adams Wickham Jr. At this gallery, it is written that Albert Stubblebine, suggested trying to prove that he could bend the spoon or whatnot to this guy, the head of the chief of staffs or whatever. And then the guy got offended by that. And that event also led to Albert Stubblebine's retirement officially. Now, the thing that's interesting, again, when you think about him and you talk and you try to figure out like the beginnings, like all the details of that which sparked his interest, Wikipedia doesn't really provide too much of it. But they did mention that he was a key sponsor to the Stargate program. Now, the head of the Stargate program, this is another thing that they did mention on Wikipedia. But they only mentioned, like when they mentioned this part, they mentioned this in the article about Stargate, when they mentioned Albert Stubblebine as well. Now, this other guy, Lieutenant Frederick Holmes, he was the head of Stargate, But when Albert Stubblebine is mentioned, in relation to him, the head of Stargate served as his aide and psychic headhunter as well. That's it. They don't speak no more as far as the relation between both of them. But going back to the head of the Stargate, the government instituted officially, this is not a conspiracy theory, these are all facts. The government instituted Stargate in 1980. No, not 80. I'm tripping. 1978. All right. It was the Defense Intelligence Agency, and then another contractor by the name of Scientific Research International that was based out of California. Both of these partners together is what instituted Stargate. Stargate wasn't called Stargate back then. It was really a collection of different programs that was studying parapsychology. Stargate they didn't begin to refer to it as Stargate until the 90s, until around 1991, when a lot of that information got declassified. But as far as Frederick Holmes, he was the head of Stargate from 1978 up until 1987 or whatnot. And again, being that he's also mentioned as an aide to General Albert Stubblebine, I feel like that makes General Albert Stubblebine even much more significant in this regard. The only thing is, again, that's all they mention. They don't mention too much as far as like all of the results that he yielded. They did say, like, as far as Stargate, for example, they'll have like annual Senate and House Select Committee meetings about this, where not the participants, well, I guess you could say the participants, but the people that were pretty much running these programs, they'll meet in front of Congress or whatnot, and give the results, and then there will be a review, and then, just like I say, various organizations that collectively got referred to as Stargate later on, they were funded by the government. And in the midst of these meetings that will happen annually, they were continually funded yearly speaking. So in my mind, even though a lot of the results never came out, and then some people, well, not never came out, but like, you can't get infallible information in regards to the results. Because, like, for example, many of the people that participated in Stargate, they were never told the results of these experiments. So, like, if I participated in Stargate, and say I was successful, I was able to remotely view something, they wouldn't tell me that I was accurate in my endeavor. And I speak further on that later on. But as far as these meetings that would happen, I feel like if the government continually, funded these groups, obviously there was some type of positive results that were yielded or whatnot. Now, this leads me to President Jimmy Carter, who was the president from 1977 to 1977 to 1981 or whatnot. Now, the reason why he's extremely relevant and significant is because like 20 years after the fact, after his presidency in the early 2000s, he got interviewed by Playboy magazine, and he was able to prove without a shadow of a doubt that there was at least one successful story that nobody could question, pretty much. Now, the guy asked him, it was really like the Playboy magazine asked him all types of questions, but toward the interview, because you could look at the whole transcript online as well, but toward the end of the interview, the first question he asked him was about, his experience with seeing UFOs, which he is also on record as highlighting as well. And he was saying he was at some type of Lions Club dinner, and it was about like 20 or 25 other people there, and they all seen this strange object in the sky that turned out to be a UFO, but he made it clear that he never said it was something from outer space. But, he was basically hinting at something that was other than something other, like a aircraft that is out of this world, based on his sudden and abrupt movements that he felt like contradicted physics or whatnot. So that's the first question. The second question the guy asked him was about Roswell. He pointed out like 2 years prior about 2 years prior almost to him becoming president, part of his campaign promises, he was saying like he'll look into Roswell, let the people know what was going on. He said he did look into it, and there was some intelligence there, but he's not going to too much speak on it. But he was like, I'll go ahead and point out something that did happen. We had a woman. He said the head of the CIA, when I looked this up 6 years ago, his name was Turner Stansfield. He was the head of the CIA during Jimmy Carter's presidency, right? But as far as going back to this anecdote during this interview, Jimmy Carter said there was a woman from California, he didn't state her name, who came in and assisted. Now, again, I'm going to assume he's talking about the Stargate program or one of these factions that later on got collectively referred to as the Stargate program. I doubt if he's talking about like anything dealing with Albert Stubberby, for example. You know what I mean? But he said it was a twin engine plane that crashed in the Central African Republic, and they had satellites in space that would circle around the world in like 99 minutes. And they had these satellites trying to locate exactly where this plane was at, where they thought the plane was at based on intelligence. And they were unable to locate this twin engine plane. So they brought a female in. When I first heard about this, like I said, I thought about it so deeply, but I'm going to keep it simple on here. They brought a woman in. She was able to go into her trance state of mind. And then she was able to locate where this plane was at based on latitude and longitude. And when they zoomed in on this latitude and longitude, they found the plane there. So that turned out to be a success. Now, of course, as far as like the person that was interviewing the president, you know, he was like, the president said, told him he don't know exactly how they were successful and he don't know how to explain it. But based on the assistance of this lady, they was able to locate the twin engine plane or whatever. Now, to me, as far as this, that is a clear example. Like, if I look at it like this, anybody that got questions about remote viewing, you know, that anecdote in itself pretty much answers the question. Because going back, remember, like, all of the people that participated in these experiments, they were never told, about the results of these experiments. So as far as like this lady, if she had died after that and never really told, like if she got family members, but they don't really know too much about as far as what she participated in, she'll never be documented throughout history. But she's a key person in proving the reality of remote viewing, which I think is so fucking interesting because I look at it like this, as far as like the different portions of the brain or whatever. I feel like I'm gonna put it like this. You got at least two parts of the brain that are at work when it comes to remote viewing because of their functions. That would be the precuneus and I would say the lingual, I can't even say it right. The lingual portion of the brain that is located more so within the occipital region, right? The reason why is because the lingual portion of the brain is responsible for like sleeping. The precuneus is responsible for like recalling scenes and events and that which is attached to it. If she had to bring her mind to a super calm state, which again brings up delta, alpha, and beta waves, but more than likely she would have been in a delta state of mind at the time. That means if they did some type of like, if they were to put electrodes on top of her head to measure like the activity of electricity, basically, I feel like that portion of her brain, the lingual portion, would definitely light up, and possibly precuneus portion of her brain. Even though, as far as like recalling scenes, events, and everything attached to it, what she accomplished and that which she ended up seeing visually was something that was completely foreign to her experiences at that point. But I still feel like somehow that portion of the brain had to also have been at work or whatnot. So that's remote viewing. Again, remote viewing, I feel like, is a reflection of incorporeal will, because it's something that transcends I guess you could say the normal mechanisms of consciousness, you could say. So I will put that in that category. The next anecdote that's similar to that is Pam Reynolds. Now, Pam Reynolds had a brain surgery pretty much. This is in 1991. This is in Phoenix, Arizona. The hospital was called Barrow Neurological Institute. And the doctor, his name was Spetzler. And there were a total of about like 20 doctors altogether that operated on her. And the operation took about 7 hours. Now, she was brought into a state that would be the closest you could say to death, just to make it simple. I mean, she had clicking modules in her ear and all. But just to make it real simple, she was basically brought into a basically beyond a sedated state. And during this whole operation, after the 7 hours had ended, not immediately, but she was able to recall like a year later things that went on, conversations that was had, like things like I think the vein is too short, or pass me this, but like basically like some of the utensils that they mentioned, she was able to recall and pinpoint it. And as far as like certain words throughout the conversations that was taking place during that whole 7 hours, she was able to point at least like 3 different phrases that was said, as well as the music that was played. It was a song called California Hotel, or Hotel California, something like that, by the Eagles. She was able to recall that song as well. Now, as far as like 3 years after that, the doctor that operated on her validated that like some of the words that she recalled, as well as the music that was played, was actually the case or whatnot. Now, when I wrote about this 6 years ago, I wanted to get like opinions that might not like people that may disagree. And so I went online and I looked up like criticisms, and I basically brought the best ones to like, I basically picked through the best ones. And one was she could have had a conversation, like she could have researched some of the tools that were used or whatnot beforehand and pointed them out, or like maybe conversations that she had with the doctor. She probably like heard what they had to say, or heard them recall some of their words during the operation and basically just repeated them after the fact, as if she heard them while she was in basically a fucking dead state of mind. But I look at it like this. Okay, years and years later, out of all 20 doctors that participated in that operation, nobody ever came out and said, listen, we had this conversation around her, or I had this conversation around her, and that was how she was able to recall some of the words that was said, or this is how she knew about the music that was played because we mentioned this song. Nobody. It's 2021. Nobody 20 years after the fact has come forth and said that. I feel like this, even if one doctor said, listen, I had said this around her, it would completely refute her story. So therefore, I feel like Pam Reynolds, her account is also legitimate, and that also proves out-of-body experiences. Again, now going back to Robert Monroe, this particular anecdote with Pam Reynolds, I would give more scientific credit to what she has to say based on like tools that were used during her operation. Granted, she wasn't in the laboratory, but based on her own account, and she was laying on a table, that's when she began to hear these words, and all of a sudden she astral projected out of her body, or she felt herself ascending out of her body toward the ceiling, and then she was able to look down upon everybody else in the room. Now, being that she, in the midst of that experience, she recalled what was said and music that was played while viewing this, and no doctor came out to contradict her account, that means what she had experienced has to be true. Now, the part that I took issue with, more and more, let me re-put that. What she experienced has more veracity to it than what Robert Monroe, put forth, or what he may have documented in his first book that, admittedly I've never read. But I still would give her more credit. But the thing is, as far as like her, I just didn't like when I read about it, she's talking about like lights that she has seen. Similar to Robert Monroe's experiences as well. She said that she's seen certain lights and this and that, then family members and all that type of stuff. Now, even 6 years ago, I was like, damn, I wish you would have never said that, but keeping it real, I'm like, damn, that's the only part that comes off as fictional, but you can't really deny the concrete details that she pointed out. So, like, in rereading about different portions of the brain, I figured out why that's the case. Again, going back to the lingual portion of the brain, for sure, the lingual gyrus, that definitely has to be at play. I would say the lingual, the precuneus, and then the fusiform, which is responsible for the recognition of facial features. So, being that she's in,